Tonight, we travel back to a time when four young men from Liverpool changed the world forever. They didn't just make music, they shaped a generation, inspired millions, and turned dreams into sound. This is the story of friendship, fame, and the unstoppable rhythm of the Beatles. So sit back, relax, and let the journey unfold. And if you love true stories that echo through time, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for more. The last note hung in the air like a breath that refused to end. The crowd had been roaring a moment ago, the flash bulbs bursting, the stage trembling beneath their feet. But now, as the final chord faded, it was only sound, a vibration stretching into memory. The young men stood together, their instruments still warm, their heart racing, their faces shining under the light. They didn't yet know it, but music had just changed forever. To understand how the world reached that night, how four boys from a rainy city in England became the Beatles, we must go back to where the sound began. In Liverpool, in narrow street filled with smoke, laughter, and the hum of post-war life trying to rebuild itself. The year was 1940, and bombs were falling. Britain was deep in the Second World War, in small homes along the river Mersey. Families huddled through blackout and air raids praying for peace. It was in this world that John Lennon was born, on October 9, in a city still shaking from explosions. His childhood was a mixture of love and loss. His father, a sailor, gone for long stretches. His mother, Julia, bright and musical, but too free-spirited for the times. John would grow up mostly with his aunt Mimi, who loved him fiercely and tried to keep his feet on the ground, even as his mind began to drift toward dreams of sound and rebellion. Across town in the summer of 1942, another boy arrived. Paul McCarthy, born into a home filled with warmth, laughter and song. His father Jim played trumpet and piano, leading a small jazz band in his youth. Music was part of their household, constant companion during evenings when electricity flickered and the family gathered around the radio. Paul absorbed those melodies like sunlight. Then came George Harrison, born in 1943, the youngest of four children, quiet but sharp, a boy with restless figures and a mind that sought beauty in detail. His home was modest, but his spirit burned bright. And finally Richard Starkey, the boy who would one day be known to the world as Ringo Starr. Born in 1940, like John, Ringo spent much of his early life in hospitals, fighting illness after illness. He learned resilience early, patience, humor, and rhythm, the kind of rhythm that would later hold the world's heartbeat in its grip. Liverpool in those years was not glamorous. It was a port city still marked by war. Its skyline lined with cranes and soot, its people working hard to rebuild their lives. But it was alive with music. American ships brought jazz, blues and rock, raw records into its docks. In the evenings, cafes and pubs buzzed with sound, guitars strumming, pianos rattling, voices singing. Music became the city's heartbeat, the place where hope finds its voice again. John Lennon was among the first to hear that call. As a teenager, he gathered friends in school halls and backyards, forming small bands that played the songs they heard on imported records. Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, Little Richard, John's voice carried a kind of rough truth, something raw and untamed. Then came Paul. He was younger, but talented beyond his years. His ear for melody uncanny, his fingers quick on the guitar. When the two met at a church festival in 1957, something clicked instantly. Paul played a song for John, 20th Light Rock, and John, impressed by the young boy's skill, invited him to join his band, the Quarrymen. Neither knew it then, but that handshake would be the spark that ignited a global fire. Soon after, Paul brought in George, the quiet guitarist with extraordinary skill and a calm presence that balanced John's edge. The three of them began to rehearse endlessly, dreaming of something bigger. They didn't yet have money, fame, or even a proper drummer, but they had each other, and they had music. The late 1950s were a restless time. Britain was changing, young people searching for a sound of their own. Rock and roll was no longer a novelty, it was a declaration. And for full boys from Liverpool, it became a language, a way to speak when words failed, a way to dream when the world felt grey. They played wherever they could, youth clubs, school dances, grimy pubs, where cigarette smoke hung thick in the air. Their instruments were cheap, their amplifiers small, but their energy was unstoppable. They weren't perfect, not yet, but something was forming, a chemistry, a rhythm, an invisible thread that connected them. In 1960, they took a bold leap. A series of gigs led them to Hamburg, Germany, a city that would test them, shape them, and turn them from amateurs into professionals. In the dim clubs of the Reeperbahn Bar, they played night after night, often for hours, to crowds that cared little for mistakes and much for energy. The noise, the neon light, the chaos, all of it burned into their bones. It was there, in that blood of sweet and sound, that the Beatles were born. The name stuck, the lineup solidified, and the music began to tighten into something that would soon sweep the world. Though they didn't yet know it, the journey that began in those smoky German bars would lead them to the biggest stages on earth, to screams, to fame, to heartbreak, and to the kind of immortality only music can give. For now, though the light of Hamburg flickered low, guitars hummed, and four boys from Liverpool played like their lives depended on it. The sound that changed everything had found its beginning. The new light of Hamburg glowed through the fog like strange new stars. It was 1960, and the port city pulsed with energy, smoke, laughter, and music spilling from every corner. The Beatles had arrived with cheap guitars, worn-out amplifiers, and a wild hunger to play. They were not famous, not yet even fully formed, but they were ready to chase the dream wherever it led. Hamburg was raw, The clubs they played in were nothing like the polite halls of Liverpool. These were places filled with sailors, dancers, students, and night wanderers, a world awake long after midnight. The air inside was thick with sweet and cigarette smoke. The wooden floors sticky with spilled beer, and on the small stages, under flickering light, the young Beatles played for hours, sometimes 8, 9, even 10 hours a night. Their hands ached, their voices cracked, their clothes clenched to their skin with heat. But night after night they played on, rock and roll, blues, anything that kept the audience moving. They learned to survive by rhythm, to keep tempo even when exhaustion threatened to knock them out or down. Hamburg hardened them. It stripped away hesitation and replaced it with fire. John's rough humor became sharper, Paul's melodies bolder. George, still the youngest, played with precision beyond his age, his guitar crying and laughing in equal measure, and Ringo, who would join later but already moved in the same circles, was learning his own rhythm, shaping the beat that would soon define them all. At first, they slept in cramped rooms behind the stage, surrounded by noise and new, but for the first time, they were living their dream, not a fantasy from a record, but the raw, living thing itself. They weren't just playing songs anymore, they were becoming a band. The audience didn't make it easy. Drunken crowds shouted for faster songs, for louder guitars, for anything that could drown out the noise of the street outside. The Beatles learned to read them, to sense when to push, when to slow, when to fill the room with laughter, and when to hit that perfect note that made even the wildest dancer stop and listen. They began to dress sharper, move smoother, talk quicker. The long night taught them rhythm not only in music, but in life itself. They began to find their sound, a sound full of energy and rebellion, but also melody and heart. It was rough around the edges, yet beneath the noise was something new, something the world had not yet heard. Between sets, they talked about the future. John, the dreamer, spoke of fame with a grin that hid how much he wanted it. Paul, ever the perfectionist, talked about songs, how they could make something bigger, something of their own. George listened, thoughtful and steady, fingers moving idly over guitar strings. They argued, they loved, they imagined. The nights stretched into weeks, the weeks into months. Hamburg became their crucible. Bands came and went, but the Beatles stayed. Their playing growing tighter, their confidence louder. They began to write small songs of their own, snippets of ideas between covers of Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly. The people who heard them in those days didn't yet know that they were witnessing. To them, they were just another loud band in another loud club. But for the young man on stage, something scared was happening. They were learning how to hold an audience, how to make sound into something that moved heart. And they were learning how to hold each other, how to fight, how to forgive, how to stay together, even when tempers flared. Friendship in those days was forged through sweat and strings, through the unspoken understanding that each needed the others. Alone, they were good. Together, they were becoming great. By the time they returned to Liverpool, everything had changed. They were sharper, stronger, Freddie, the boys who had left England wide-eyed and uncertain came back as a force, confident, rebellious, magnetic. They had a name that stuck, a sound that was taking shape, and an ambition too large for the small clubs of home. Their fans noticed, crowds grew, teenagers packed dance halls, drawn by the rhythm that felt new yet familiar, wild yet joyous. The Beatles were still local heroes, but destiny was already pulling them towards something larger, towards studios, records, and stages that would hold the world's gaze. And in the midst of all that noise, and sweat and laughter, the four of them could not have known what was waiting just beyond the horizon. A record deal, a world in frenzy, and a moment that would split history into before and after. The fire of Hamburg had shaped them. Now they were ready to set the world alight. Liverpool welcomed them back like an old friend with a knowing smile. The docks were still lined with cranes, the sky still heavy with grey, but the Beatles had returned from Hamburg at something different. They were no longer a group of boys chasing sound. They were a band, confident, electric, unstoppable. It was late 1961, and word was spreading fast through the city's music scene. The Cavern Club, a dim underground space filled with cigarette smoke and laughter, became their home stage. Night after night, the Beatles played to walls, sweating from heat and sound. The air was thick with rhythm, and the crowd, young, wild, and loud, responded with feverish energy. There were leather jackets, or they wore leather jacket now. Their guitars slang slow. They joked, teased the audience, filled every corner of that small cellar with raw joy. And in that basement, something was beginning. People began to talk about them, about that strange power, that chemistry, that something that no other band had. It was during one of those nights that a young record store manager named Brian Epstein first saw them play. He had heard customers asking for their records that didn't yet exist, and curiosity brought him to the Cavern. What he saw surprised him. The room was chaos, teenagers screaming, bodies moving to the beat, 4 young men on stage commanding every heartbeat. Yet beneath the noise, Epstein saw something more: charisma, precision, possibility. After the show, he approached them. His speech was polished, his suit crisp. He seemed from another world entirely. But what he offered would change their lives forever. Management, structure, direction. Epstein believed he could take the raw energy of the Beatles and turn it into something the world would recognize. Under his guidance, the transformation began. The leather jackets were replaced by matching suit. The wild edges were softened, the humor refined, but the soul, the sound, remained theirs. They rehearsed, refined, dreamed bigger. Epstein became not only their manager, but their believer, the man who carried their music into rooms they could not yet enter. He brought them to London, to the offices of record companies that turned them away again and again. The executives said guitar bands were over, that rock and roll was fading, that the sound was too rough, too northern. But Epstein persisted, each rejection sharpening his resolve. Then, one day, the door opened. George Martin, a producer at EMI's Parlophone label, agreed to hear them. It was a quiet meeting, nothing grand, just four boys in the studio, their instruments ready, their nerves trembling. They played. The energy filled the room, imperfect but alive. Martin listened, thoughtful, intrigued. When the music stopped, he smiled slightly and said, "You've got something." That something became the start of everything. Under George Martin's direction, they recorded their first single, "Love Me Do." It was simple, catchy, honest, a blend of Lennon's edge and McCreary's sweetness, the very balance that would define them. Released in October 1962, the song climbed the charts slowly but steadily, and when it reached number 17, the Beatles heard themselves on the radio for the first time. The moment was small but monumental. Four young men huddled around the wireless, grinning, realizing the dream had finally begun to breathe. The following months were a whirlwind: studio sessions, rehearsals, interviews. "Please, Please Me" followed, faster, brighter, sharper, and this time it soared to number one. Sadly, the small clubs could no longer contain them. Crowds gathered outside venues. Girls screamed their names. The energy that had filled Cavern now spilled into the street. Each song built on the last. From me to you, she loves you. I want to hold your hand. The melodies grew tighter, the harmonies more seamless, the sound unmistakable. The chemistry between Lennon and McCartney was lightning in a bottle. John's wit and rebellion met Paul's melody and warmth, while George's quiet brilliance and Ringo's steady beat anchored it all. They were still young, barely out of their teens, but they had already begun to shape culture. Their accent, their humor, their haircut, even the way they stood, changed what fame could look like. The world was paying attention, and the spark of Hamburg was now a blazing light across Britain. But as the applause grew louder, so did the pressure. Fame was arriving faster than anyone could control, and what had begun as four boys sharing dreams was now a movement, one that no one fully understood yet. Still, for now, in 1963, in the bright glow of early success, the Beatles laughed more than they worried. They were together, they were making music, and the sound that began in basements and bars was now on the airwaves, in every home, on every lip. The world had begun to hum to their rhythm. By early 1964, the sound of the Beatles was no longer confined to Britain. It had escaped, spreading across oceans, carried by radios, records, and whispers of something new, something wild, joyful, unstoppable. People called it Beatlemania. The word itself was strange, like a fever or a storm, but it fit. The world had never seen anything like it. It began quietly enough, a ripple of excitement when their records reached America. "I Want to Hold Your Hand" hit the airwaves in late 1963, and within weeks it was everywhere. The melody was simple, but it carried something powerful, an energy that made hearts race and feet move. It wasn't just a song, it was a spark. Then came the invitation. The Beatles were asked to perform on the Ed Sullivan Show, the most watched program in America. For four young men who had once played smoky clubs for spare coins, The idea of performing live before millions felt unreal. Yet when they stepped onto that stage on February 9, 1964, guitars gleaming under the light, the moment froze in history. John, Paul, George and Ringo, four silhouettes against a world holding its breath, they began to play, and the sound filled every living room in America. All my loving, till there was you, she loves you. Outside the studio, fans screamed so loudly that police could barely hold the lines. In homes across the country, families sat glued to their screens, watching in disbelief. The next morning, newspapers called it the night America fell in love with the Beatles. Over 70 million people had watched. 70 million. The next day, airport were chaos. Crowds gathered wherever the band went, chanting their names, waving signs, tears streaming down faces. Hotels were surrounded by thousands. Every appearance became an event. Every movement tracked. Police escort, locked doors, flashing cameras. It was a kind of fame no one had experienced before. And yet through the noise, the laughter remained. The Beatles handled madness not with arrogance but with humor. In interviews, they joked with reporters, answering questions with wit that made headlines. When asked how they found America, Ringo grinned, turned left at Greenland. Their charm made them untouchable. Even as hysteria grew, they seemed grounded. Four friends riding a wave they could hardly believe was real. But behind the humor was relentless work. Tours across Britain, Europe, America, endless travel, sleepless night, deafening crowds. On stage, they could barely hear their own instrument over the screaming. Yet somehow they stayed in sync, their harmonies flawless, even in chaos. Between tours, they recorded in the studio, away from the noise. The magic deepened. George Martin, their steady producer, guided them like a quiet architect. Together they crafted songs that blended heart and innovation. A Hard Day's Night, Can't Buy Me Love, 8 days a week. The music grew, matured, shimmered with complexity, while still carrying joy. Each song seemed to speak directly to the times: hope, youth, freedom, love. The Beatles had become not just musicians, but a movement. Then came the film. A Hard Day's Night premiered in 1964, capturing the whirlwind of their daily lives with humor and energy. It wasn't just a movie, it was an introduction to their world. The laughter backstage, the exhaustion, the friendship that held it all together. The world watched not only the band, but the bond between them. Everywhere they went, something shifted. Fashion changed, hair grew longer, suits slimmer, voices louder. The Beatles weren't following culture, they were creating it. And yet beneath the chaos, their hearts stayed rooted in music. Fame, though thrilling, was also isolating. Their hotel rooms were cages, their lives scheduled to the minute. The pressure mounted. Reporters followed their every word. Fans followed their every step. Still, every night on stage, when the light came up and they began to play, the joy returned. For those few minutes, all the noise, the screams, the flash bulbs, the expectations faded into rhythm. By the end of 1964, the Beatles had conquered the world. They had sold millions of records, top chart on every continent, and performed before crowds that shook the ground with sound. Their songs filled radios from London to Tokyo to New York. But even as the world sang their music, they were beginning to ask new questions. What more could they say? Where could they go next? Because deep inside, even in the middle of Beatlemania's roar, there were still four musicians searching for sound, for meaning, for evolution, for something beyond the noise. And soon that search would lead them far from pop simplicity into a new realm of creativity, a place where music would turn into art, and the Beatles would become more than a band. They would become a revolution. By 1966, the noise had grown too loud. The Beatles could no longer hear their own instrument on stage. The screams of fans drowning out every note. Stadiums shook, police lines buckled, and flights between cities blurred together. Fame, once a dream, had become a storm, beautiful, unstoppable, and exhausting. After 6 years of relentless touring, the four of them began to wonder, what if the music itself could be louder than the crowds? What if, instead of chasing the noise, they retreated into the quiet, into the studio, and began again from the inside? And so began the studio years, the transformation of the Beatles from a live sensation into the most creative force music had ever known. When they walked into Abbey Road Studios, they were no longer the same young man who had sang She Loves You in matching suit. They were artists now, searching for something new, a sound that went beyond the simple joy of pop, reaching for emotion, meaning, imagination. The first step was Rubber Soul, released in late 1965. It marked a turning point. Gone were the bright teenage love songs. In their place came introspection, lyrics about identity, relationships, and the quiet questions that fame could not answer. In My Life, Norwegian Wood, Nowhere Man, each carried poetry and reflection. The songs felt like windows into the soul, honest and human. For the first time, the Beatles saw the studio not as a place to capture performance, but as an instrument itself. They experienced with sound, reversed tapes, altered tones, layers of harmony. George, fascinated by new instrument, introduced the sitar after learning from Indian music, Ravi Shankar. The sound was hypnotic, a doorway into other worlds. Then came Revolver in 1966, bold and boundary breaking. Eleanor Rigby, Tomorrow Never Knows, Yellow Submarine. Each track pushed the limit of what music could be. With producer George Martin, they blended orchestras, loops, and studio effect into landscapes of sound that had never been heard before. The world listened in awe. Critics struggled to find words. Fans, once screaming in stadiums, now sat quietly with headphones, letting the music speak in ways words could not. But change was not without struggle. Touring ended that same year after chaos in Manila and controversy in America. Exhausted and misunderstood, the Beatles decided to stop performing altogether. They would no longer chase the roar of crowds. They would chase creativity. And from that decision came Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, an album that would redefine everything. It was 1967. The world was shifting. The counterculture was rising, colours growing brighter, minds opening wider. The Beatles absorbed it all, the art, the poetry, the freedom, and turned it into sound. In the studio, they became explorers. Every idea was tested, every boundary was pushed. Strings, brass, sitars, chords, all blended into one dazzling symphony of imagination. The album was not a collection of songs, but an experience, a single journey from start to finish. When it was released, it stunned the world. Critics called it revolutionary, fans called it magical, and musicians called it a challenge. With Ripper, the Beatles had transformed from a pop group into artists. Their work studied like literature, their lyrics quoted like poetry. Songs like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, A Day in the Life, and Within You Without You invited listeners to dream, to see music as a space of wonder, reflection, and transcendence. Behind it all, the bond between John, Paul, George, and Ringo was both strength and strain. They were growing older, changing as people. John's writing became surreal and searching. Paul's became melodic and tender. George's spiritual and introspective. Ringo's steady and warm. Together they balanced chaos with harmony. The studio became their refuge. Long night, endless takes, laughter, argument, breakthroughs. They were inventing as they went, turning sound into something more, an emotion you could feel even in silence. By the end of 1967, the Beatles were no longer just musicians. They were architects of the modern sound, painting with instruments, shaping how the world heard itself. But beyond the genius, something quieter stirred: fatigue, pressure, and distance. The fame they had sought had become a shadow that followed them everywhere. They had reached the peak, but what waited beyond the summit? For now, though the music spoke louder than the doubt, the Beatles had turned their world inward, and in doing so, had given the world a new language of sound. The screams had faded, but the music, the real, eternal music, had finally begun to sing. By 1968, the sound of the Beatles had carried them farther than they ever imagined, to fame, to fortune, to the edges of creativity itself. Yet even as the music soared, the man behind it began to search for something quieter, deeper, more lasting than applause. The world called them geniuses, icons, revolutionaries, but inside each of them felt a question rising: what comes after everything? The answer for a time was silence. They found it in India. After the whirlwind of SGT Pepper and the chaos of celebrity, the Beatles traveled to Rishikesh to study meditation under Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. The journey was part retreat, part revelation. Cameras followed them to the foothills of the Himalayas, where the Ganges flowed slow and silver, and the air hummed with chant and bird song. For John, Paul, George, and Ringo, it was a chance to step away from the noise, to breathe again, to listen not to the crowd, but to themselves. Days began with sunrise and ended in starlight. They sat cross-legged in the open air, learning the stillness that had eluded them for years. It was not just rest, it was rebirth. For George, especially, India opened a spiritual door that would never close. His bond with Ravi Shankar, his exploration of Hindu philosophy, his quiet belief that music was prayer, all deepened. His songs began to glow with something sacred, within you, without you. Born from this period, became not just a melody, but a meditation, a reflection on the unity between souls. Paul found inspiration too, though his mind was always busy with melody. In the quiet of the ashram, he wrote songs on his acoustic guitar, tunes that would later find their way into the White Album. John's writing turned inward, rawer than before. The stillness made him face truths he had long buried. About love, loss, identity. Out of that came songs that felt confessional, sometimes fragile, always real. Even Ringo, often the quiet uncle of the group, felt the shift. He missed home, but carried back from India a calmer rhythm, renewed joy in simplicity. The time in Rishikesh was peaceful, but it was not without strain. Fame followed them even here. Disagreement surfaced over music, philosophy, direction. The harmony that had once bound them was beginning to fray. Yet despite the tension, the days in India produced an explosion of creativity. Between them, they wrote dozens of songs, enough for an entire new world of sound. When they returned to London later that year, they carried that mixture of peace and unrest with them, spiritual clarity tangled with human complexity. It poured into their next project, the Beatles, better known as the White Album. It was an album unlike any they had made before. Vast, varied, unpredictable. Each song felt like a window into a different soul. John's Dear Prudence, Paul's Blackbird, George's While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Ringo's Don't Pass Me By. It was brilliance born from dissonance, a reflection of both unity and division. In the studio, the air often crackled with tension. Gone were the easy days of laughter and late-night experimentation. Now each Beatle seemed to chase his own vision, his own truth. There were 4 artists sharing one space but moving in 4 directions. And yet, when their music met in harmony, it was still magic. Obladi, oblada, happiness is a warm gun. Julia. Helter Skelter, each different, each unforgettable, the White Album was a mirror of the world, of their friendship, of their evolution. Outside the studio, the world was changing too. The late 60s were alive with protest, poetry, and transformation. The Beatles had once sang about love. Now the world demanded meaning. John, in particular, felt drawn to activism. His growing partnership with Yoko Ono began to shape both his art and his life. Together they would soon turn peace into performance. The years of shared laughter and brotherhood were giving way to something more complex. Respect mixed with fatigue, fiction shadowed by independence. Fame, that beautiful storm, had carried them to the highest peaks, but it also left them windswept, searching for solid ground. Still, through every argument, through every pause and sigh, the music continued. It had always been their truest language, the one thing they could still speak together when words failed. By 1969, They would gather one last time to create something pure, something that would bring the story full circle. But in that moment, in the glow of India, the hum of the White Album sessions, in the quiet spaces between songs, there were simply four souls traveling across the universe, each searching for peace in their own way. The year was 1969, and the Beatles were standing at the edge of their own legend. What had begun as friendship and laughter in the clubs of Liverpool had become a phenomenon too vast to contain. They had changed music, changed fashion, changed how the world dreamed, and now somehow the dream itself was changing. In the studio, the warmth that had once filled every chord now flickered uncertainty. The laughter came less easily. Long hours of recording were interrupted by quiet disagreement, by silences that spoke louder than words. They were still bound by sound, but the ties of youth were loosening. Still, the music, always the music, carried them forward. The sessions for what would become Let It Be began with hope. They returned to simplicity. They wanted to play live again, to capture the raw joy of their beginnings. Cameras rolled as they rehearsed, documenting what they hoped would be a fresh start. But all tensions lingered beneath every note. John was restless, pulled toward new ideas, and the avant-garde energy of his life with Yoko Ono. Paul, ever the perfectionist, pushed for structure, melody, harmony, for holding on to what the Beatles had always done best. George longed for space to express himself more fully, his songwriting now blooming with quiet wisdom, and Ringo, steady and kind, tried to keep the rhythm of peace between them. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. The footage from those sessions would one day show the weariness behind the brilliance, the smiles that came late, the disagreement that lasted long, yet even amid the cracks, their genius still shone. Let it be. A long and winding road across the universe, songs filled with longing and acceptance, with the quiet grace of goodbye. Then something remarkable happened. Out of all the tension came one last surge of unity. They gathered again at Abbey Road Studios, the place that had witnessed every stage of their journey, to make what would become their final masterpiece. The sessions felt different, calm, focused, dignified. They knew, even in an unspoken, that this would be the end, and so they gave everything they had left. Paul brought melodies that felt timeless, golden slumbers, You Never Give Me Your Money. John offered songs filled with truth, come together, mysterious and bold. George, at last, fully in bloom, gave them something, and Here Comes the Sun, two of the most tender songs ever written. And Ringo, humble as always, anchored it all with his steady heartbeat of rhythm. They worked as they had in the beginning, four men united by sound. The bitterness faded for a while, the jokes returned, the harmonies once again fit perfectly, as if time itself paused to let them say farewell. When the album was finished, they stepped outside into the London morning. On a small street outside Abbey Road, they walked across a zebra crossing, one after another, calm, unhurried, unknowing that the moment would become immortal. The photograph, simple and silent, captured not just four men, but an entire era, saying goodbye. Abbey Road was released that same year, and it was a triumph, final disguised as a beginning. The music was radiant, polished, full of light. Critics hailed it as perfection, a final bow that somehow sounded like forever. But by 1970, the inevitable came, one by one. They drifted apart, each following his own path. There was sadness, yes, and misunderstanding, but there was also peace. The story had run its course. When Paul released, McCartney and John declared the band finished. The world sighed as if waking from a dream too beautiful to last. But the beauty did not vanish. The music remained, living in the grooves of records, in the airwaves, in every heart that had ever heard it. Years later, when asked about their breakup, Ringo said softly, "It was time. We were growing up." And maybe that was true, because the Beatles had always been more than a band. They were the sound of a generation discovering itself. The soundtrack of growing up, loving, dreaming. The final note of Abbey Road. The medley of voices, guitars, and that last whispered line. And in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. Lingered in the air long after the studio lights dimmed. It was not a farewell, not truly. It was a promise, because music, once born, never dies. And the Beatles, those four boys from Liverpool, had given the world not just songs, but something larger, the reminder that joy, love, and creativity can change everything. Their road had been long, and though it wound through fame and fire, it ended in harmony. The years rolled on, but the music never left. Even after the world had watched the four of them go their separate ways, the Beatles remained everywhere, on radios, in cafes, drifting from windows on warm evenings, humming through headphones in quiet rooms. Their songs became part of the air itself. Decades passed, and still the notes carried their light. Every generation found them anew. Children who had never known the 60s sang Hey Jude as if it were written for them. Couples danced to something. Dreamers whispered the words of Across the Universe. The world kept turning, and the Beatles kept playing. Each of the four continued down his own path. John Lennon, always the rebel and poet, poured his soul into peace, singing of love, truth, and the hope of a world without walls. With Yoko Ono, he turned his art into activism, his music into a message. Songs like Imagine became hymns for humanity. Simple words carrying enormous weight. But in 1980, the world was stunned by tragedy. John's life cut short far too soon. The silence that followed was heavy, but his spirit remained. His voice, his words, his courage lived on in the millions he had inspired. Paul McCartney carried the flame of melody forward. His music blossomed through new decades, filled with warmth and optimism, with wings and beyond. He wrote, performed, and kept the joy alive. On stage, his voice, still full of wonder, became a bridge between past and present, uniting generations under the same rhythm. George Harrison, the quiet soul, retreated from the spotlight, but never from music. His songs, steeped in spirituality, invited listeners to look inward. My sweet Lord, all things must pass, hymns of peace, reflections of his lifelong search for meaning. His guitar, gentle yet profound, spoke the language of the heart. Ringo's Starr, ever the steady heartbeat, became a symbol of resilience and friendship. His drumming, simple and perfect, had carried every song with grace. In his last or in his later years, his laughter and kindness kept the spirit of the Beatles alive, a reminder that joy too is an art. Together, even apart, their legacy endured. The world changed again and again, but their music remained constant, a compass of emotion. When joy was needed, here comes, the sun rose to meet it. When sadness lingered, let it be whispered comfort. When love bloomed, all you need is love became truth itself. Their songs were no longer bound to time. They belonged to humanity, to anyone who ever needed hope, or peace, or a melody to hold onto in the dark. In museums, photographs, a full young man in black and white capture the early laughter. In films and documentaries, their voices echo, still full of life. The zebra crossing at Abbey Road has become a pilgrimage. Footsteps retraced by millions, proof that memory can become sacred ground. And somewhere in every city and small town, in bars, cars and bedrooms, someone presses play, and the opening chords of a Beatles song fill the air once more. Perhaps that is the truest measure of their legacy, that even when the world quiets, their sound endures, reminding us that creation, like love, never truly ends. Their journey began in smoke-filled clubs, with borrowed guitars and restless dreams. It carried them through noise, fame and fire, through laughter and loss, to a silence that hums eternally. They gave us not just music, but a map of emotion, the soundtrack of what it means to be alive. And in the end, as they once sang, the love you take is equal to the love you make. And that was the story of the Beatles, 4 ordinary boys who created something truly amazing. Their songs still live in our heart, reminding us that music can unite, heal, and transcend time itself. If you enjoyed this story, give it a like, share it with someone who loves great music, and subscribe for more real stories that move the soul. Until next time, keep listening, keep dreaming, and keep the story alive.